You've seen places like this before. Safe, beautiful, perfect. Or at least, that's what they want you to believe. But step past the gates, and you'll find the truth. From 19th century communes to billion-dollar smart cities, even to a warrior state that worshipped obedience. Utopias have a way of turning into prisons. And the most famous one still inspires us today. Here's what chills me. The same patterns that once drove over 900 people, including children, to take their own lives, are quietly growing inside our modern digital utopias. Tonight, I want to take you from dream to collapse, to show you how paradise and control have always shared the same border. And by the end, you might see the next one coming. Let us begin. Blueprints of belief. When the dream took shape. They all began with the best of intentions. A Scottish industrialist, a group of religious visionaries, a French philosopher, an American spiritualist. Each looked at the world around them, its greed, its violence, its inequality, and said, "We can do better." So they gathered their followers, drew up their plans, and left everything behind. Real-life utopias, like New Harmony in Indiana, founded by Robert Owen in 1825, promised a cooperative society built on reason and shared labor. New Harmony was built on the Enlightenment idea that human character was shaped by environment. Owen believed poverty and inequality could be eliminated through rational education, communal property, and moral uplift. He purchased an entire town to model this dream. No private ownership, no organized religion, no class divisions. But within 2 years, the dream collapsed. One former resident wrote home, "We were to be the example for the world." But there were arguments from the start. Too many minds, too many ideas. Internal conflict, lack of clear leadership, and economic pressure tore it apart. According to historian J.C. Furness, New Harmony was long on vision, but short on the practical unity to survive. The Oneida community in 19th century New York took a different approach, abolishing marriage, promoting communal child rearing, and pursuing perfectionism. Founded in 1848 by John Humphrey Noyes, the Oneida community believed Jesus had already returned, ushering in a world where perfection was possible on earth. They practiced radical doctrines like complex marriage, where everyone was spiritually married to everyone else, and sexual relationships were managed by elder committees. Children were raised communally, and spiritual superiority was linked to emotional detachment. Their radical social experiment lasted longer, nearly 30 years, but eventually splintered under pressure from the outside world and from within. Primary sources from former members describe emotional isolation, jealousy masked as equality, and a quiet desperation few dared voice aloud. But if utopia couldn't survive community, what happens when it becomes a religion? As Tirza Miller, a member of the Oneida community, confessed in her diary, "You were taught not to feel jealousy, but I did, and it made me feel broken, like I wasn't perfect enough for the kingdom." In Europe, Charles Fourier's followers built utopian experiments called phalanstères, socialist compounds meant to harmonize work and pleasure. Fourier, a French philosopher, envisioned those communes of exactly 1,620 people as structures to express the full range of human passions. Each person had a place in a cosmic order, working not out of obligation, but in line with their desires. Harmonious living would replace coercion. Morning might start with farm work and end with opera or chess. It was an attempt to engineer happiness with mathematical precision. Few were completed. Most were abandoned within years. The dream, again, proved fragile. A disillusioned participant reportedly said, "The plan was beautiful on paper, but when it came time to act, nobody knew who would shovel dung and who would sing opera." These early intentional communities reveal a pattern. Utopias rarely fail from invasion or catastrophe. They unravel from their own ideals. The more perfect the system, the less room it has for contradiction, for weakness, for the human condition itself. The question that remains open: were these experiments noble failures or warnings ignored? Now, let's enter the darker phase of Utopia, when belief becomes obedience and leaders stop asking for trust and start demanding it. If this story made you rethink what paradise really means, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've been with me through this descent, you already know how much your support matters. A like, a share, a subscription. They aren't just buttons. They're what lets me keep digging into the stories most people would rather forget. So if you want more investigations like this, stay with me. Let's continue. The Messiahs who became monsters. At the heart of many failed cults in history, there is not a philosophy but a person, a voice, a presence, someone who radiates certainty when the world feels uncertain. They don't just offer a better society. They offer meaning, belonging, and absolution. Until one day, they ask for more. Charismatic leaders have always played a central role in the downfall of intentional communities. In the 1970s Oregon, the spiritual commune of Rajneeshpuram began as a bold experiment in peace, art, and self-realization. But under the magnetic control of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, the dream twisted. According to court records and FBI investigations, it culminated in psychological coercion, bioterror plots, and authoritarian surveillance, all justified in the name of spiritual freedom. One ex-member later reflected, "We were changing the world, or so we thought. But when the guns appeared, we just nodded. That's how deep the silence went." And then there was Jonestown. In 1978, over 900 people died in the jungles of Guyana, convinced by Jim Jones that death was their only path to liberation. The Jonestown Massacre, according to scholar Rebecca Moore, whose family members died there, was not spontaneous. It was the final chapter in a long process of psychological erosion, staged obedience, and gradual moral collapse. Jones had replaced God, family, and self, until nothing remained but his will. Odell Rhodes, one of the few Jonestown survivors, recalled, "I heard them dying. I heard my family. And I ran. I ran through the jungle with their voices behind me." Even earlier examples reveal similar dynamics. At Oneida, founder John Humphrey Noyes declared himself the spiritual authority on complex marriage, deciding who could sleep with whom. In these dangerous communes, belief wasn't just central, it was weaponized. Psychological studies of cult dynamics reveal how slowly this happens. First, isolation, then dependency, then ritual. Finally, a collapse of identity so total, leaving no longer feels like survival. It feels like betrayal. And yet, they stayed. The line between belief and obedience is not as clear as we'd like to think. And when that line is crossed, it doesn't just cost lives, it rewrites what people are willing to die for. Let's now go deeper into what life inside these communities felt like. What was seen, what was hidden, and what could never be said aloud. Cracks in Eden, inside the collapse. There's a moment in nearly every Utopia experiment when something unspoken shifts. The food runs out, the rules change, the smiles tighten. What was once idealistic becomes rigid. What once felt liberating becomes suffocating. And yet, most people stay. Inside failed communes in history, the collapse is rarely announced. It arrives quietly, almost politely. At Jonestown, it was the slow replacement of dissent with public confession. At Rajneeshpuram, it was the sudden appearance of guns and silence. In Auroville, it was the ideal of universal unity dissolving into political infighting, land disputes, and spiritual hierarchy. Drawing from archival records and academic research, we know this. The structures built to protect the dream often became its jailers. Surveillance disguised as harmony. Discipline framed as love. At Oneida, members reported being assigned sexual partners by committee under the guise of spiritual purification. At Biosphere 2, a 1990s ecological utopia, oxygen ran low and tensions exploded. Proof that even science-backed dreams aren't immune to human pressure. One of the participants, Dr. Linda Lee, recalled, "We were supposed to model the future of life. Instead, we stopped speaking to each other and started hoarding oxygen." Anthropological analysis suggests the emotional toll in these communities extended far beyond their visible failures. Many who left reported years of guilt, identity loss, or the inability to trust even their own memories. "We were building paradise," one former member of Synanon reflected, "and we didn't realize we were already in the cage." The most disturbing pattern: collapse doesn't always mean escape. In many of these real cult tragedies, by the time the system cracked, there was no way out, physically, psychologically, or spiritually. This is where Utopia stops being a dream and becomes a trap, and what happens next is often erased. If this story already has you questioning what Utopia means, just wait. The future ones don't look like communes, they look like apps. In our final chapter, we ask, have we learned anything at all? Or are we chasing the same illusions, just with different names and shinier tools? Tomorrow's utopias wear different clothes. The walls look different now. Sleek interfaces, digital currencies, mission statements wrapped in code. But the promise is the same. Across Silicon Valley, crypto-backed enclaves, remote work communes, and AI-governed societies speak the old language of freedom, perfection, and escape. They promise autonomy from the failures of the past. They invite us to start over. But the attempts to build a perfect society are never truly new. They are echoes, rewritten in cleaner fonts. Real-life utopias haven't disappeared. They've gone virtual, algorithmic, and borderless. Projects like Liberland, Prospera, or The Line in Saudi Arabia invoke visions of innovation, liberty, and post-state evolution. Liberland, founded in 2015 on a patch of disputed land between Serbia and Croatia, brands itself as the world's first crypto-anarchist micronation. It promises radical liberty, zero taxes, voluntary governance, and blockchain-based citizenship. Its founder calls it a refuge for those who feel abandoned by traditional nations. But critics warn It's more ideological theater than functioning society. Behind the renderings, journalists and watchdogs note recurring themes: lack of transparency, social inequality, and concentrated power in the hands of a few visionaries. Meanwhile, in Honduras, Prospera is a charter city run not by politicians, but by a private tech company. Operating under a legal carve-out, it has its own laws, courts, and tax code. It promises streamlined governance, innovation, and prosperity. But whistleblowers and local residents have raised concerns about neo-colonial control, lack of transparency, and the erosion of democratic accountability. Saudi Arabia's The Line is perhaps the most audacious of them all, a proposed 170-kilometer smart city in the desert, enclosed in mirrored walls and powered by AI. It claims there will be no roads, no cars, no carbon emissions, only a perfect linear civilization of 9 million people. Yet leaked documents suggest surveillance on an unimaginable scale, forced displacements, and decision-making concentrated in the hands of a royal elite. A utopia by design, or a dystopia in disguise. What happens when the next utopia isn't in a jungle or a commune, but coded into your phone, your job, your sense of self? According to scholars analyzing this trend, the psychological drivers remain identical to historical communes: disillusionment with mainstream society, belief in technological salvation, and the magnetism of belonging to something visionary. The difference is scale and speed. Modern cults no longer require compounds or remote jungles. They exist in comment sections, Discord servers, live stream donations. Cults of personality can be built on platforms, monetized in real time, and disguised as movements for change. The question is no longer, could this happen again? It already is happening again. Historical consensus points to a disturbing pattern. The greater the utopian promise, the deeper the obedience it demands, and the harder it is to see the warning signs before it's too late. So what do we do now that paradise is back in style? That answer isn't in history books. It's in the choices we make now, who we follow, what we believe, and what we're willing to surrender for the dream. And if you think these utopias were unique, built in jungles, deserts, or glass towers, remember there was once a real society that became the blueprint for control. Sparta promised unity, discipline, and strength beyond any rival. To the outside world, it looked like perfection forged in steel. But inside, it was a world where freedom was sacrificed for survival, where every life was shaped by the state from birth to death. If you want to see how a society can turn its ideals into chains and still be remembered as heroic, watch my investigation into the dark side of ancient Sparta next. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It matters to us more than you think. Good night.